Israel has gone into Lebanon on the ground. This is after 11 months of continuous rocket attacks, drone attacks, anti-tank missile attacks. Israel's finally escalated to this new stage in the conflict, which is aimed at degrading Hezbollah's capabilities and basically destroying the infrastructure that they have positioned along the border, that because of the presence of those Hezbollah forces and those weapons, that was why so many tens of thousands of Israelis, about 60 to 70,000, have had to evacuate their homes in those borderline communities. So we saw for about 2 weeks significant aerial strikes that were carried out by Israel, bombardment against Hezbollah positions. But as of Monday night, in the night between Monday and Tuesday, significant ground forces, the 98th Division of the IDF has now crossed into Lebanon and is operating in the south. The IDF has said that this will be a limited and a very focused ground operation, which leads to the assumption this will not be extended, it will not be extensive, it will not be long in duration. But I always say that with some skepticism, David, because you know how these things begin, you don't always know how they will end. Well, the 98th Division is made up, it's a formation that is made up and consists of a number of different units and capabilities. So you have within it, for example, an armored brigade. You have within it some of the paratroopers units and their brigades. And you also have, just as one example I'll highlight, is the unit that's called the EGOS, which stands for like a nut. That would be the Hebrew, a walnut would be how it's translated into English. But EGOS is a unit that was founded in the late 90s, early 2000s, as a unit that was meant to specialize in combating the guerrilla warfare of Hezbollah. So this is a well-trained group of soldiers whose expertise is essentially operating in areas like in southern Lebanon. And we have to just keep in mind for a moment, southern Lebanon is very different terrain than what we've seen in the Gaza Strip, where Israel has been operating on the ground for almost the last year. It's sand down there, it's dry, it's desert. It's fairly flat. Southern Lebanon is hilly, it's rocky, it's muddy. There's a lot of green, a lot of brush, a lot of bush, and you have to be very careful as moving throughout that territory because of the possibility of explosive devices, ambushes, underground different caverns and tunnel complexes that Hezbollah might have there. So it's a very different type of warfare. Anything that Israel is going to do on the ground will receive significant support from the Israeli Air Force. You know, there's a lot of people who have been wondering, for example, why does Israel even need to send ground troops into Lebanon, right? Why not just use the Air Force? And it's a legitimate question. And especially because that's what we've seen has been the focus up until now, right? For the last 11 months, Hezbollah has attacked Israel, and in response, whenever Israel has retaliated, it's been very focused and very precise with what it's done, but it's only used the Air Force. So why now ground forces? And I think that there's a few reasons why. The first is it now has the ability, because it's pretty much completed the most of what it wanted to do militarily in Gaza in a big way. It still has some lower intensity operations in Gaza, but nothing that like the 98th Division, which until a few weeks ago was still in Gaza, is now able to move and divert its attention to the north. So that's reason one. It now has that capability to refocus itself. The second is, at the end of the day, no matter how good the intelligence is that you will have to be able to strike from the air, you need to have boots on the ground if you really want to clean out an area. You won't know everything that's there. You won't know some tunnel that might exist. You won't know about an arms cache. You won't know about a command center. So if you really want to clear it out and really provide security, you got to put boots on the ground and you got to go door to door in this area. Symbolically, there is importance in Israel showing Hezbollah and Iran that it's not afraid to send its troops on the ground into Lebanon. We have to remember that it's been 18 years since the last time that Israel sent troops into Lebanon during the Second Lebanon War. And Hezbollah, kind of like what Hamas thought ahead of its attack on October 7th, was that Israel was scared and deterred from using ground forces. So it's important to show, as a way to boost Israel's deterrence, to show its enemies that it is not afraid, that it does not fear sending its forces, and that there's nowhere it will not go to try and create and ensure the security of its people. On the one hand, I think that Israelis understand, and the government understands, that there is a political resolution that will be required here, right? There is no just military answer and solution to Hezbollah, unless Israel's looking to completely occupy Lebanon for an extended period of time, which I don't see in the cards. So what it wants to do really is be able to further weaken Hezbollah, to degrade the capabilities in the south, to prevent them from being able to pose a direct threat to those communities. Let's remember, they will still have rockets and missiles in the day after whatever this operation leads to. But if we can stop them from firing those anti-tank missiles, which is what was mostly used to destroy hundreds of homes along the border, by evacuating the borderline communities in the north, Israel essentially gave Hezbollah free rein and created a shooting range for them. So pushing back those forces, destroying their capabilities and their weapons storage centers, is able to provide security for the people of northern Israel. The question of the day after, though, is really it's a larger global and international question, because it's really a question about the future of Lebanon. You know, Israel can only engineer things to some extent. We're a small country. We're fighting conflicts on multiple fronts at the same time. We have still a war in Gaza that is not resolved. We have 101 hostages there. Hamas is still in control effectively of Gaza. So we have to remove Hamas as the governing entity of Gaza. We're facing rockets and missiles almost daily now from Yemen, cruise missiles from Iraq, unrest in the West Bank. There's multiple fronts that Israel needs to deal with. To think that Israel is somehow going to completely eradicate Hezbollah, I think is too much to expect at the moment. But who can help here are the Americans, are the French, are the Europeans. And Lebanon wants to be free. Most Lebanese people want to break away from the grasp or the clutches that Hezbollah has over their country, and by consequence, Iran. They want to be a free country. And the question is this opportunity now, which has presented itself with the elimination of Hezbollah's top leadership from Hassan Nasrallah down. And let's just stress the fact that Nasrallah is something like an Osama bin Laden for this region, right? And the fact that he is now gone, does that not create an opportunity for the Americans and the French and others to really try to engineer the freedom of Lebanon from what they've been under? When Nasrallah was killed, right, who was celebrating? And I think this was so telling. The Syrians were celebrating. Lebanese were celebrating, right? Arabs throughout the Middle East were celebrating. You haven't heard a word from the moderate regimes of Saudi Arabia, of the United Arab Emirates, of the Bahrainis, of the Egyptians after Nasrallah was killed, because they all wanted him removed. And this was because they understood the threat. They genuinely understand the threat. Saudi Arabia has recognized Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, right? They're not calling for Israel to restrain itself like we're hearing from the French and other people around the world. They're not calling for a ceasefire because they want to see Hezbollah eradicated. They know that this is what the future of the region really depends on, is the elimination of these radical Islamic terrorist groups that are funded and provided for by the Iranians. But what Israel is also trying to do, and has tried to do this, I would think, successfully over the last year, unfortunately, like you said, David, it doesn't get credit for it. But when it went into Gaza, it pushed all the people from the north to the south. When it went into Rafah, it pushed everyone from the south to the center. It's doing something very similar in Lebanon right now, where it's saying to people, even last night, when it before bombing more buildings in the Dahia Hezbollah stronghold of Beirut, it said it put out the information, the location of the buildings it was going to bomb, and said to people, please leave the area, leave these buildings, and be at least 500 meters away from the buildings, right? No one else does that in conflict. No one else does that in war. You're basically saying to your enemy, I'm giving you the heads up, I'm coming after you. So, I'm giving away the element of surprise. Who does that when you're fighting an enemy? Do they do that for us? Of course not. Does anyone warn Israel before they're firing a rocket into our cities? No. But we do that. Do we get any credit? No. Instead, we get accused of war crimes and genocide and violations of international law. The world is warped and upside down. But I think that people who do know the real facts understand what's really happening.
The Israel Defense Forces is conducting limited and targeted raids along Israel's northern border against the threat Hezbollah poses to civilians in northern Israel. These localized ground raids will target Hezbollah strongholds that threaten Israeli towns, kibbutzim, and communities along our border. Hezbollah turned Lebanese villages next to Israeli villages into military bases, all ready for an attack on Israel. Hezbollah had prepared to use those villages as staging grounds for an October 7th style invasion into Israeli homes. Hezbollah planned to invade Israel, attack Israeli communities, and massacre innocent men, women, and children. They called this plan Conquer the Galilee. For decades, UN Security Council resolutions have called on Lebanon to make sure that its territory is free of non-governmental armed groups. UN Security Council Resolution 1701 from 2006, agreed upon by Israel and Lebanon, requires that there be no armed personnel, assets, and weapons other than those of the government of Lebanon and UNIFIL in southern Lebanon. 18 years after 1701, Hezbollah is the world's largest non-state army, and southern Lebanon is swarming with Hezbollah terrorists and weapons. If the state of Lebanon and the world can't push Hezbollah away from our border, we have no choice but to do it ourselves. I want to make it clear. Our war is with Hezbollah, not with the people of Lebanon. We do not want to harm Lebanese civilians, and we're taking measures to prevent that. We will not let 7th of October happen again on any one of our borders. We will continue doing whatever necessary so that Israeli families can return to their homes in safety and security.